This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The death toll passes 60 after a powerful earthquake in Turkey and Greece. The African Union is worried about a spike in coronavirus cases on the continent. And opinion polls show it's a tight battle between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in the swing states just days to the U.S. election. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also ahead this half hour. We look at how Egypt has avoided an economic recession even as it battles COVID-19. And in sports, Mercedes wins the Constructors' Challenge in Italy as Lewis Hamilton closes in on his 7th title. We start the program in Turkey, where the death toll has been climbing after a powerful earthquake struck the country's Aegean coast and Greek islands on Friday. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Authority said on Sunday there were 62 dead in Izmir, which bore the brunt of the quake. Greece reported 2 deaths on the island of Samos. The Emergency Management Authority added that 940 people were injured. Most of them have been discharged from hospitals, while 8 remain in intensive care. Hopes are fading for finding more survivors, the latest being a 70-year-old man pulled from the rubble of a collapsed building after 33 hours. Turkey is crossed by fault lines and is prone to earthquakes. In 1999, 2 powerful quakes killed 18,000 people in the country's northwest. Now, in the Philippines, at least 7 people have been killed as Typhoon Goni, the strongest one this year, moves across the country. Goni was a super typhoon when it made landfall early on Sunday and was downgraded hours later when it headed to Manila. Our correspondent Gretchen Malalad reports from the capital.
Typhoon Goni has left a trail of destruction, devastation, and 7 deaths so far. It's the strongest typhoon of the year, packing winds up to 225 kilometers per hour as it made landfall Sunday morning in the southern part of Luzon. It has weakened midday and more so in the afternoon. But even so, the capital Manila is still bracing from the wrath of Typhoon Goni as it shatters through a densely populated city of 13 million people. The government has evacuated thousands of families living in danger zones since Saturday in preparations for the typhoon. Disaster response teams were busy clearing debris from the roads, toppled electric lines, and also trees. Typhoon Goni earlier has hit hard the Bicol region, where roofs of houses blown off by strong and unrelenting winds. There were also reports of tremendous amount of agricultural loss in Quezon province. Communication lines and power lines have also been cut up in several provinces, which hampered the assessment of damages and relief efforts. The Civil Defense Department reported 7 deaths in the province of Albay. Some of the victims died in a landslide of volcanic ash near the active Mayon volcano. The police have reported numerous houses being swallowed by the landslide. Well, aside from the destruction, what's very challenging for the country is this storm or this typhoon has hit us in the midst of the global pandemic. People are now cramped up at evacuation centers, and social distancing is very hard to practice. Government funds for rehabilitation after the typhoon are also scarce because most of the funds are being spent on addressing the COVID-19 pandemic.
Turning to the U.S. elections, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is still ahead in opinion polls as Tuesday's election nears. But President Donald Trump is hoping that he can win the swing states and secure another 4 years in the White House. Biden has led national opinion polls throughout the campaign. Many voters are concerned about Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which has killed over 220,000 people in the United States and cost millions their jobs. Our correspondent Toby Muse has more on the 2 candidates' battle in the big swing state of Pennsylvania.
Just days away from Election Day, and both campaigns are making a big push for the all-important state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania carries 20 electoral college votes. Just like it's hard to see Donald Trump winning the White House again if he loses the state of Florida, the same can be said for Joe Biden and the state of Pennsylvania. A poor showing there could bode very badly for his campaign. President Trump has a number of rallies planned for the state.
And I'm thrilled to be back in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania so much. Thank you. Where the story of American independence began. It's the state where the American Constitution was signed. Think of that. And 3 days from now, this is the state that will save the American dream.
Joe Biden and former President Barack Obama held an event in Michigan.
I tell you what, Barack Obama, it's great to be with the president again. It reminds me what we can be when you have a president of character, a president respected around the world, a president our kids looked up to and did look up to.
Many of the polls show Biden beating Trump in the state of Pennsylvania by around 5 points, but people on the ground in the state say that the race is much tighter. This comes as what looks like a new surge in coronavirus infections. The US tallied more than 99,000 new cases, a global record on Friday. More than 500,000 new cases in the past week. While the worst is in the central part of the country, the Midwest and the Mountain West, there are fears that it could spread across the entire country. The coronavirus has changed the way Americans are voting. More than 90 million Americans have already voted, either mail-in voting or early voting. Analysts say we could see a turnout in the vote not seen for 100 years. More than 9 million people have voted in the state of Texas this year. That's more than all of the votes Texas saw in 2016. Toby Muse reporting for CGTN, Washington.
Algerians have been voting in a referendum on changes to the constitution. The amendments include limiting presidential terms to 2 5-year terms and extending the authority of parliament and the judiciary. The changes would also commit the president to choosing a prime minister from the majority bloc in parliament. Opponents are critical, saying the vote falls short of fundamental reform. Sunday's referendum was pushed by President Abdelmajid Tebboune and the military that took over after the resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika earlier this year. To win the referendum, either the yes or no camp needs at least 51% of the vote. Voting is expected to end within the hour, and the results will be announced on Monday. Meanwhile, vote counting is underway in Côte d'Ivoire. This after voters went to the polls yesterday. President Alassane Ouattara is seeking to secure a controversial third term in an election held amid opposition calls for a boycott and a civil disobedience campaign. Ouattara was set to step down after his second term, but he said a 2016 Constitutional Court ruling allows him to vie for the top seat in the country once again. Abidjan was largely calm and voting went smoothly in most districts, in contrast to the violent run-up to the election. But efforts to obstruct voting led to clashes and the vandalization of polling stations in other parts of the country. Electoral authorities by law have up to 5 days to announce the results. A growing number of COVID-19 infections over the last 2 months has left Kenyan authorities concerned. The government has been easing restrictions, recently opening schools and allowing bars to operate. CGTN's Enoch Sokolia has the details.
On Saturday, Kenya reported 1,395 new COVID-19 cases, the country's highest in a single day. The East African nation has registered a steady rise in cases since the government began a gradual reopening of the economy. The number of coronavirus-related deaths has also been climbing.
As individuals, we must take responsibility ourselves to ensure that we are not part of the problem.
Do not drop your guard just yet. Now, this has been the message here in Kenya in recent days, even as the number of COVID-19 cases continue to rise. According to experts, it takes just one person to infect thousands or millions of people.
But despite this call, there is what authorities in Kenya are calling reckless disregard of protocols put in place to curtail the spread of the virus. Many are no longer wearing a mask when in public or adhering to social distancing. Beatrice Adhiambo, who operates a salon in Nairobi, is worried. She says despite the rising number of infections, people seem not to care.
I feel bad with what politicians are doing. They tell us there's COVID-19 and we need to take care, but they go on mobilizing crowds. So we really do not understand.
We don't want to close the economy under lockdown so that everybody stays at home, because it's the surest way of ensuring that people do not transmit it.
The Africa CDC says Kenya has registered a 45% increase in new cases in the last 1 month.
With hospitals registering a high number of COVID-19 patients, there is a concern that Kenya's healthcare system could be overrun by the virus. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi.
Meanwhile, authorities in Ethiopia have warned that people who fail to wear masks in public could face up to 2 years in jail. They'd be jailed for violating restrictions aimed at curbing the spread of COVID-19. Authorities say citizens are becoming lax in observing restrictions after the state of emergency was lifted. CGTN's Girum Chala tells us more.
In Ethiopia, the COVID-19 pandemic still poses a threat to human lives and the economy. Alarmed by the increased laxity, the government has introduced restrictions. These include prohibiting people from shaking hands, requiring them to always wear face masks in a public place, not sitting more than 3 people at a table, or not keeping less than 2 adult steps away around 6 feet apart.
The improvements made in the restrictions after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic are to encourage the public to take part in preventive measures. However, we still ask the people to practice wearing face masks, washing hands, and keeping a reasonable distance, especially in public settings. This should be strictly followed by each and every individual and communities as a whole. That is the only way we can defeat the virus.
Here on the streets of Addis Ababa city, it seems the COVID-19 restrictions are being largely ignored. Wearing face masks and keeping the right distance appear to be things of the past. This situation is almost similar inside shopping malls, restaurants and cafes too. But new COVID-19 cases are being registered as the death toll from the disease also increased. People agree that they need to be serious in implementing the government's COVID-19 guidelines.
The
level of negligence is unbelievably high, and as you can see, most people nowadays do not wear masks or even keep distance between themselves in public areas. This is not supposed to happen. We should follow the guidelines every day. Some people even think this is politics. It's not.
Action of not complying with the restrictions is not only wrong, it's also dangerous. We should continue wearing face masks until the day this disease is controlled.
Many government officials, including President Sahle Work, are busy informing and educating the public to change attitudes and fight the pandemic. The president also believes combating COVID-19 requires global unity.
My call for action would be to eradicate the pandemic by mobilizing all necessary resources and knowledge, better global coordination with the United Nations at the center, robust international cooperation, not international competition.
The African Center for Disease Control and Prevention, headquartered here in Addis Ababa, says there are tangible signs of a second wave of the pandemic across the continent. In Africa, the failure to implement restrictions and guidelines put together by both Africa CDC and individual governments has seen many nations record spikes in new COVID-19 infections. But still, some experts believe Africa is doing fairly well, given the situation in other parts of the world. Group Jara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. We look at how Egypt has avoided an economic recession even as it battles COVID-19. And getting women into leadership, Somalia's 30% quota challenge ahead of elections. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Pressure is mounting in Somalia for the country's leadership to uphold a 30% quota for women in the upcoming parliamentary elections. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo has more on efforts to secure more seats for women lawmakers.
At his confirmation hearing in September, Somali Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble reiterated his administration plans to support more women representation in politics.
I have made it clear. The quota for women must be guaranteed. I have received calls from all sectors of the society urging me to ensure that women receive their fair share of representation.
However, Somali women have expressed concerns of a deliberate attempt to lock them out of the upcoming polls, comments shared by rights groups and various advocacy organizations. Last week, 6 women were nominated as lawmakers into the Hirshabelle Regional State Parliament. 84 were men, a move that has angered women in Somalia.
The government and parliament have vowed to support the quota for women, but that is not enough. We want a law put in place that will allow a woman to be given a seat in any constituency that has at least 3 representatives in parliament. The president and prime minister must work to endorse it, or else women will continue to be sidelined in politics.
Meanwhile, as the country plans to hold parliamentary elections next month, the United Nations has joined other rights groups in pressuring leaders to ensure women are not sidelined.
We urge all of Somalia's leaders to continue to collaborate in this manner with the preparations for the national elections so that they are underpinned by transparency, fairness, and inclusivity. This will include ensuring that the 30% quota for women's representation in the parliamentary elections is achieved.
At the federal level, women lawmakers account for 24% in both Parliament and the Senate. Advocacy groups are now warning that massive corruption will likely affect the outcome of the polls. The public will have no say in the process once again, as leaders fail to agree on how to conduct a popular vote, a move analysts say will have given marginalized sectors of the society a fair chance at seeking elective positions. Abdulaziz Billo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Egypt hasn't escaped the COVID-19 pandemic, but it has managed to avoid an economic recession. The IMF has raised its growth estimate for the North African country, unlike many other nations. CGTN's Yasser Hakim looks at how Egypt has been keeping the pandemic at bay while reopening the economy.
The coronavirus reached Egypt in March through a number of tourists, as claimed by officials. A committee headed by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi was established to monitor and lay out the plans for combating the pandemic.
We are a heavily populated country. We're exceeding 100 million right now. There is a variability between the government rates as regards the overcrowdedness issue and the level of the people living over there, the social and economic and education level. There is a variability. All these variables were put into consideration while we were putting our plan to combat and prevent the spread of COVID-19 in the community.
The peak rate of infection exceeded 1,000 people per day in June. Already in place was a nighttime curfew. Enough medicine and masks were also supplied to the market at low prices for Egyptians. A partial lockdown saw the closure of schools, most businesses, entertainment facilities, hotels and restaurants, except for delivery.
In March, the state closed airports, universities, schools, and a lot of other things too. Acting early was very good.
By September, daily new cases dropped to the low hundreds. Schools reopened with smaller class sizes and are continuing online education. Hotels, cafes, restaurants and cinemas are allowed to operate at 50% capacity. Shisha smoking at cafes is still prohibited, as well as parties and weddings. Many Egyptians, however, have eased their health precautions.
I'm
not abiding strictly to safety measures like before, and most of the people around me are the same. I wear the mask in buses or the metro, but while going out with friends or in the streets, I take it off. I can't imagine living with COVID-19. I hope they find a vaccine to end it.
Infections have largely plateaued in the past several months, but there are fears of a possible second wave.
Lots of measures are being installed. This is for the mass gatherings that are by virtue of the everyday life. They should be there, like in schools, in universities, in factories, in companies. Measures have been installed to reduce the crowdness index and to keep a good distance. Working from home has been encouraged. And at the same time, I think that we are speaking right now about extending these measures a little bit more for the sake of protecting our people.
The government has strengthened punishment on individuals and institutions that don't abide by health regulations to ensure the pandemic is kept under control. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And coming up in your sports